false motives of others. Be careful of those. Hi everyone, we're going to be addressing the topic of 20 pieces of silver. Many of you have heard about the Joseph Project. There are multiple Joseph Projects. You have some that are international Joseph Projects, and then you have the one that is coming out of Ghana. It's been going on for a while, and it's supposed to represent a reflection on the situation with Joseph in the Bible and selling Joseph into slavery for 20 pieces of silver. We're just going to quickly go over the narrative in Scripture so that you know what transpired in terms of these brothers in this narrative, so that you have a better idea of what people are even talking about when they are referring to this Joseph Project. What happened to Joseph that there would be a Joseph Project, and who were the individuals involved in what happened with Joseph. You often hear narratives, you hear biblical narratives where people are associating themselves with people in the Bible. And usually when you hear the narrative, you hear about all of these wonderful things that the person can associate with, but you don't often hear about the other narratives. And so we're going to be looking at this 20 pieces of silver narrative with just one question to go along with the narrative that we're going to read. And so the question that we're going to be looking at is, does fruit fall far from the tree? Now, to give you a narrative backdrop, this narrative is about the children of Jacob, the sons of Jacob. And the sons that are named in the narrative, in this particular portion of the narrative, are Joseph, Reuben, and Judah. The understanding is that Joseph is what is known as the dreamer, Reuben is the mediator, and Judah is the slave trader. For those of you who would like to follow along, you can join in at Genesis 37. We're at 15. As a little backdrop for those of you who are not familiar with this story, Joseph was a younger child of Jacob, so he's considered like a baby of the family. He was considered a favored child, and so the older brothers had the idea that their brother was loved more than they were by Jacob. Sounds familiar? And so he also had a special coat, and he was known for his dreams. And in a series of dreams, he dreamt that his brothers, his family, that they would be bowing down to him for one reason or another. And he thought it wise to share this dream with his family. Turned out not to be so wise after all. So anyway, we're starting off here where Jacob has sent Joseph to join his brothers to tend the flock. So we're at 15, and it says, "And a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field, and the man asked him, saying, What seekest thou?" It's important to keep in mind that Joseph is a child in relation to these brothers. And he said, "I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks." And the man said, "They are departed hence, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan." And Joseph went after his brethren and found them in Dothan. And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. So these are some interesting family dynamics, again, going along with this Abrahamic family line of dynamics. There's always drama in this particular family line. There are conspiracies in this particular family line. There are attempts to destroy and usurp in this particular family line. And so this is a continuation of the narrative, and that is a part of this family line. And here the brothers continue on at 19. And they said one to another, Behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him and cast him into some pit. And we will say, Some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. Now the older brother Reuben heard this conversation between these brothers. So they would be younger brothers for Reuben and older brothers for Joseph. And so at 21, and Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, Let us not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands to deliver him to his father again. So Reuben is trying to figure out, according to this narrative, how to get Joseph out of their grips and then get Joseph back to the father. And so this is the plan that he comes up with, this idea. Yes, Israel's children were a special group. Okay, so Acts 23, and it came to pass when Joseph was come unto his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him. And they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, there was no water in it. 25, and they sat down to eat bread. Now they've dropped him off into this pit, and these little characters decided they were going to sit down and eat bread. And they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels, bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And so while Reuben had the idea of ultimately rescuing his brother and taking his little brother back to his father, Judah came up with yet another bright idea. And at 26 it says, And Judah said unto his brethren, What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. And so Judah came up with this idea of making a profit off of selling his little brother. It's a very interesting narrative given some of the later narratives. And so the other brothers were content with this idea of selling Joseph to the Ishmaelites. And again, Ishmael is the brother of the grandfather of this collective of brothers known as Jacob's children. And so you can see this idea came so readily that this idea of enslaving people was not a foreign construct to these children known as Jacob's children. And so this idea was so readily accepted by these brothers and so readily offered by Judah. And so at number 28, you see it says, Then there passed by Midianites merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. And so these older brothers had this bright idea to either destroy Joseph and then alternately to sell him into slavery. And so that's what occurred in this particular passage. So there are a couple of things to make note of with respect to this family, this collective. One is they have a very interesting way of problem solving. The idea was to slay the younger brother first, and then they settled on this idea of selling him into slavery, so turning into slave traders. What you pick up from this narrative is also that these brothers had no sense of compassion in terms of this family relationship. They didn't have compassion in relation to each other. When they did this horrible thing, they had no sense of guilt, no remorse, no compassion. So there was a callousness about what they did. And then the cooking up the story to tell the father. They didn't even bother with trying to come up with a story to tell the father. Actually, it was Reuben who came up with this narrative. But let's go on here. So at number 29, it says, "And Reuben returned unto the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his clothes. And he returned unto his brethren and said, The child is not, and I, whither shall I go?" So essentially, he's saying their little brother, the baby, is not there. And what should he do? Now, one of the reasons why Reuben might be so active in problem solving is that he's the older brother. And so he has this ultimate responsibility not only for Joseph, but for all of them. And then at 31 it says, "And they took Joseph's coat and killed a kid of the goats and dipped the coat in the blood. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, This have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no. And he knew it and said, It is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces." And these little characters actually, according to the narrative, went along with this and had their father believe that Joseph had been devoured by some beast. And apparently this sounded like a really good idea to them to have their father believe this particular narrative. Again, it's unclear what problem they thought they were actually solving with this, but this was the solution to some problem that they identified. And at 34, "And Jacob rent his clothes and put sackcloth upon his loins and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted. And he said, For I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard." One thing that's interesting to note is you have a number of individuals who identify themselves as being the children of Jacob. And some of them have taken it upon themselves to regather what they understand as these scattered tribes of Israel. However, that's in direct contravention of what the scripture indicates. And so there is no indication in the scripture that suggests that individuals who identify as children of Jacob should be going around regathering people. On the contrary. And so you have a number of individuals who are taking it upon themselves to believe that they understand who all of these children of Jacob are and their relationships to these people. You even have people identifying as different tribes. Makes absolutely no sense. They don't have any proof that they belong to Manasseh, or they belong to the tribe of Dan, or the tribe of Judah, or the tribe of Ephraim, or the tribe of Issachar. They don't have any proof that they belong to these specific tribes, but they are identifying this way because they've been given these identities. People have been calling them by these names. And even if they do identify with these different collectives, there's no conversation going on about the implications for that. Because according to the narratives in scripture, these entities were not getting along very well before they went to various places, before some of them, according to narratives, were sold into slavery again. And based upon some of the names of the people who were engaged in the slave trade by other children of Israel. And so it's very important that if people are going to be espousing these views and taking on these identities, that they fully understand the identities that they are taking on and understand the relationship between those identities and other similar identities. And so individuals might want to think twice about taking it upon themselves to regather these nations or to put themselves in a position to be victimized yet again by some of these nations that they understood or understand as brothers. Because according to the narrative, the children of Jacob have a problem with being thy brother's keeper. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.
Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those that trespass against us. Never, never, never trust.